It's fantastic to be here in Halifax. I am really a great admirer of this event, of the people who stand behind it, and I'm so proud to be one of the guys that have the ability to stand here and present to you thoughts that I have, visions we work with in the office. So I'll give you a 20-minute walk through my head, and I try to show you and explain to you thoughts we have about public space in this world. So, everything is connected. A space has its floor. This is the public space. It has walls. That's the buildings, the landscape, etc. And it has a ceiling. We should never forget it has a ceiling. This is the climate. This is the weather. This is making the condition of the public space. So, a hand with its fingers holding the pens, the color of life. These are, by the way, my hands 15 years ago. As Ethan said, we share our public spaces. We shape our public spaces. Thereafter, public spaces shape us. So what we need to do is quite clear. We need to prevent making bad spaces for ourselves because that we wouldn't like. We need the good spaces because those we can live in. Hans also mentioned this. It has been mentioned many times today, and we saw it in the diagram. A public space isn't just a flat surface of a street. It's made up by the walls, etc. It's three-dimensional. And in our office, Mandaworks, we think of that we build spaces when we do planning. So in the process of planning and design, we can address how these companions, the buildings on the side, can and should act to support the wishes of the spaces. So we don't stop by talking about the spaces, we continue and we talk about what builds the space, the walls and the ceiling. Because we need to understand what the purpose is of the public space. What is it that we want to do? What is it that we want the public space to achieve and do for us? How much sunlight do we want to have on this public space? How little of winds do we want to have going through this space? And what do we want to happen on the sides of this space? Together they make the image of the world that we envision in the projects that we work on. So, as architects of our cities, we need to identify the spaces that we want to happen. This means that we need to look at the measurements, we need to understand how people would like to use them, we need to understand the programming of the spaces and its surroundings. We need to understand the layers of the cities, and as much as we think of the future, we need to understand the history. This is very important, and it was brought up about Cogswell earlier today. How important it is when we move forward to also understand the history. Because if we do this, we can bring out what we call the hidden layers. The layers that we don't know of or have forgotten about, but that can give us a lot of asset to the design of the public space. This is a design of a new canal that we brought forward due to a history of use of water and the two sides becoming a public space. And this is how we like to work in our projects, to bring in the narrative, the story from. So we connect by making connections through streets, spaces in the city. And together this makes up a family of public spaces. And the public spaces, they set the tone for the possibilities of this new neighborhood, because these are open houses that invite people to take care and to take part of the city. And as I said, the walls, we need to work with the walls. We need to push down and we need to pull up the buildings. We need to work with the heights, the programming, the density, and the effects of this. A tall building gives more shadow. Can we push this building down a bit to pull it up somewhere else? Can we move programs around to actually focus them around the important public spaces? Because not every street, not every corner of a city as is important. So we need to find the balance on where we create the most life. This is one of the projects we work on in Stockholm. It's called the Royal Seaport. In the work that we do, we deal with 3 types of public spaces. And I'll show you a quick example of each of these ones. So one is about the creation of a public life, a public space in an existing situation. The second one is where we reimagine a space maybe that has been lost. And the third one, which is the one we work the most with, it's the new space, the new city, the new part of a city that doesn't have what we now are imagining. So we take a boat or a plane over to Iceland. This is one of the projects we work on now. So this is about creating a public life in existing space. There's an old bus terminal that sits here. The bus terminal has been transformed into a very popular food court, functioning as a meeting place for the neighborhood. Anyone waiting for the bus will pop in. We have identified this, and we understand it, and we love it. It's a potential to build further on. So, we give a support to this bus station, this new food market. And by doing this, we understand the space and the basic foundation of the new energy that has arisen here. And by following this, we also get the people here, the people behind the food court, the developers, the city itself, to come along with us. We're all happy together. We compose the space by dragging apart the new functions. We activate the spaces by creating a framework. And we introduce protected public spaces. Because after all, this is Iceland. It's +4 in the winter and it's +11 in the summer. And it rains a lot. And again, this is about the climate. And people don't use a public space, a green park, the way on Iceland as you do here or as you would do in Southern Europe. But they use public spaces. And we believe by giving them an alternative of the green open park, this is attracting people. So going from this empty area today, we envision a public space where you can't tell what is inside and what is outside, where the program moves in and out, and this is together with the municipality. So when working on this space, we also looked at the scale of it, because the scale of a space says very much about the function that you want to have and the feeling as a person you want to achieve. And many times when we have open spaces, we talk about how can we bring down the scale? How can we make it human? How can we make people feel home and safe? Many times with big historical squares, we have a massive program on the side, restaurants, bars, and many other things. In this case, we didn't have that. So this gave us the reason to move the buildings into the square and compose smaller units between the buildings. Because we think that the space is a private and a public space combined where people want to feel home. The second project is a bit of a disappointment. We were part of a final this year in this competition and we didn't succeed, but I still wanted to show you this project. And I think it also has a connection to your project here in Halifax, because this is a situation very much based on the modernistic idea of transportation, and now the city of Montreal is dealing with this. So in the idea to connect the two sides of this river bed of transportation, we invented what we call the ring. The ring was a bridge made out of two arms, one to be very efficient, the one to bring people from one side to the other, and the other one to be a pleasant route. And most important, it was bringing in bikers to cross this space. Because in the brief of the competition, nobody thought of how to bring bikers across this space. And coming from Stockholm and seeing the changes and the attitude towards biking, where the city cannot find enough space now for the amount of people that want to bike, and this is in a city where everything goes up or down, nothing is flat. We think bikers are so important. So that became the second arm, and together forming the iconic bridge. This is something we also have to think of when we think of public spaces and how to identify qualities and the memory in people's heads about the spaces. That's the iconic side of it too. So creating the idea for a large space in people's mind, HLEXIS demands a good landing, a strong relationship to history, a new innovative function, a proud and bold design. And most of all, it has to have a link with the local community and its users. And in this particular competition, we were also asked to envision a design of how to commemorate the lives of 9 throughout history important Canadian women. And this again links back to Cogswell and the idea of linking back to history. And what can you do with this? You could place 9 statues, or as what we did. We developed the idea of transferring the history of their lives into spaces related to their functions, design, or meaning to each of them. This approach was a way to create multiple spaces with their own identity, all within the one coherent design, present to some, hidden to some others, but it gives us a knowledge to history through spaces. So this is what it looks like today, and this is what we thought it could have looked like in the future. The third example, the intervention of space, is a journey what we call the Space Odyssey. When we talk about the three-dimensional space, and we start out saying it's a box, it can be any shape, but we start out saying it's a box. It gives us a starting point of understanding that this box has to have a certain measurement. It needs to be big enough to be able to function to whatever we want it to do. And this is a box becoming squeezed in at the top. Now why? Because there are other programs that need to be added, and the people coming in on the street need the space enough on the lower bottom. So what we want to do here is we want to adapt it to become. And it becomes a space of possibilities where it can meet other programs such as housing. Becoming 2 sides of quality, one very exposed, that's the housing with balconies, getting the sunlight, possibility for growing on your balcony, and it creates the protected space. And together, they could coexist together. So thinking of this, and if we would give ourselves an exercise in urban planning, always saying that when we work, we have to do it hand in hand, space and building. That puts a lot of new possibilities to us, because you're not going to let one hand go if it's a good friend of yours. So the space will inform the buildings, and the building can inform and support the spaces, along with the program you add to the buildings, etc. So in this research project, we developed all these kind of volumes of spaces, and they're all related to the sizes that were needed. Anything from an outdoor cinema to the space a tree needs for a number of benches or a public transport hub, etc. And we matched them with the density of program that we needed to fulfill. And in the end, we were able to give the city back the same amount of buildings they proposed, but with a lot more public spaces, because we moved them together and let them inform each other. So again, space and buildings in coexistence. To get from A to B can be done in various ways. Everyone knows this. And however, one place and one experience can happen at the very beginning or at the very end, we believe is much funnier and a much better city if it happens along the way. And in a good city planning and in a good existing city, those two things can, of course, live next to each other. We tried this in one other competition that we worked on. We were a bit more successful here. We were actually the winners of. This is in a city in Finland, Vasa. And just to show you, the very kind of direct answer to building out the city here would be to fill out a grid system, to sort of continue on the existence of the city. Out of the 60 proposals, when we came up with this idea, we thought, well, everyone is going to do this. Out of the 60 proposals and we were the selected winner, I found out later that about 55 other proposals, they went the whole other direction. People tried to build islands, they tried all different shapes, anything to kind of break away from the existing city and the grid that was already there, an historical grid. So we took this, very simply, we took this grid and we prolonged it into the area because this is connecting the new area with its context, with its history, and not making another suburban situation. Within the plan, we added all these streets and social alleys and small ways to break down the scale of the blocks to allow for different typologies of housing, so that you would have your social alley where you meet your friends and you can play on the street. But within one block, a great difference of typologies also to allow for different ways of living. And then the key to the twist of the project that we added, that goes back to this diagram of the straight arms and the curved one. Because by adding this intervention of what we call the diagonals and connect the district with surrounding very important spots such as the school, the sports stadium, the hospital, etc., we put the new area within a context. We open up the doors for others to go in, walk in, to be part of the city district, and of course the city district to reach out to the surrounding functions. So we simply cut the blocks and we created strong passages through the urban fabric. The meeting point between the grid and the diagonals became public spaces, or corners as we call them. So spaces along the way. I'm sorry, but this is a bird's eye perspective. I, however, fully agree. You don't get away with a design from a bird's eye perspective, but it's a good image to be part of your story with other images as well. Now we go really down between the buildings. We are driven by the idea to do better, right? In order to do so, we need to understand when we did good and when we do good, and what is it that we could do better? We very often talk about how we learn and how we move forward and we will do things better. But many times we need to look back and understand what we did great. So the idea of how to build cities isn't a linear development. It takes loops. It goes in right direction, in wrong direction, and it takes many turns. So I think we have to have this awareness. We have to be aware of that we constantly make mistakes. And we talk about this in the office, that we all need to allow to make mistakes, because by making mistakes, we create success. And throughout the development of urban planning, we also tend to forget. Therefore, again, it's very important to go back in time and to look at what we have and what we've done. This is, by the way, a 1,000-year-old street in Corleone on Sicily. This is Amsterdam, last autumn. This is an image that makes us happy, for sure. This is a place made space, I call it. It's gone. It was only there for an evening. It's gone. It happened because a group of people took initiative. They built this bathtub, they put it out, and they asked people to join in, and many did. Maybe many had a few Heineken before, but they joined in. This isn't, again, what Hans showed, this isn't what the city from above can plan. This is a great initiative, and a city needs to provide for the spaces and these initiatives. This is, to me, very much about tolerance. And we see this in the political changes throughout the world, even in Sweden happening, that we lose the idea of tolerance. And how can we build a city for people if we're not tolerant? This means that we all have to break some rules and do this every now and then. And the city and we as planners, we need to understand that this can happen. We even need to push for it to happen. As a designer, a planner, and an architect, we are team members in actively shaping our cities. And using our imagination is the sharpest tool. So I would say, let's fantasy play an important part in the design of our cities. So this is the last project, a few slides, with a question on where are spaces to be found in our city. This is the city street as we know it. In any city throughout the world, we've gone through this period of giving transportation of cars space enough, as we have always thought, to go through our cities. We know that we're also looking at this at this time, where we hope to shift the idea of that cars are the dominant and the most important figure in the city, but others are. So we turn around, we say that people and bikers, etc., are the priority in our cities. And I think everyone agrees to it, and we know of this. And the consequence of this is, of course, that we give more space to people on the sidewalks or on the bike lanes, which is excellent. It's easier to bike through the city, it goes faster, you get broader sidewalks, so you can do more shopping, you can have a coffee, you can actually stand and talk to your friend, and you can plant more trees. It's all excellent. Well, you can take it one step further, though, we think. Because again, our lives aren't only about getting from A to B the fastest way. Living and moving around in the city is much more about your friend, the meeting of a person, your shopping, you're going to work, and many of these things that aren't about the most efficient way of acting. And if you start to look at older cities and how you would have shops across the street where you would go and buy the cheese and then you go across the street to buy your bread, etc., and understand that the street itself is made out of sequences, places itself, then we also get a different eye to our streets in the cities. And this can push us as developers, planners, architects to think of how buildings can help this to happen by pulling back the buildings, by allowing spaces to happen, and to let people actually cross the space and let the cars wait. This makes it also possible to connect the streets and the places with its surrounding, its context. So in the end, if we start to think across the streets, we can let the places take over. And again, we don't build for cars, we build for people in the cities. Thank you.